There's a story about a professor, one of those heady academic types who wants to learn the ways of Buddhism. He visits a Zen master, and from the minute he is greeted at the door, this professor does nothing else but talk about himself, about his studies, about his interests, about his awards and publications. After about a half hour, the Zen master begins to grow impatient with the man. He quietly walks to the kitchen and prepares some tea and brings it into the room where they're sitting. The master places a teacup in front of the professor, who is still espousing about himself, and he begins to pour. As the bowl is filling, the Zen master keeps pouring. And eventually, the cup overflows onto the table and onto the floor. "You've overfilled the cup," says the professor. "No more is going to fit into it." And the Zen master replies, "Just like this teacup, you too are overfilled. You are so full of your opinions and speculation, your own thoughts and your desires. How will you ever learn Zen unless first you empty your cup?" Have you ever met anyone like that? I have. Someone who's just so full of themselves, their drama, their thoughts, their agenda. They have no room for anyone or anything else. I guess we all have a tendency to suffer from being too full at times, too full of our own problems, too full of our own pride or our ideas or thoughts or fears or preoccupations or fixations to receive anything else. And when we recognize it, we need to ask God for some of that amazing grace. Grace to take a little of that stuff out so we have space open to receive others. And this is called spiritual hospitality. As people of God, we're called to share hospitality. It's not just a biblical virtue, it's not just recommended, but it's a biblical imperative. It's required. In response to the hospitality that God shows us in creation, we're called to live out an ethic of hospitality. And it can take on many different forms. We all know people who have that gift of hospitality. Stacy and Chaco Perez are like that. They're always there to organize the receptions. Julia is like that. She's always sharing her love of Jesus with the kids. John and Linda and Pam and Camille and Joe and all the other hosts and hostesses share their gift of hospitality with our visitors in the morning. It's a characteristic of this faith. People with a gift of hospitality create a welcoming atmosphere, and they anticipate the needs of others. And in that process, they make others feel appreciated. They make others feel important. One of the reasons I continued coming to this church was the welcoming atmosphere, the spiritual hospitality of this faith community. There's something special about spiritual hospitality that's really quite wonderful. Something mystical happens in the giving and receiving of hospitality. It's a form of service to Christ. It's not defined by grand or heroic efforts offered only by those who are eligible for sainthood. It happens in the simple, basic acts that we perform for each other. We're asked to look around, assess the need, and then do something about it. How many times have you walked in that door and somebody says, "Hey, good morning, good to see you"? Or at the Peace, someone you haven't seen in a while, "Hey, it's great to see you." Those are those little acts. Now, this is the part where we wiggle in our uncomfortable pews, because unfortunately, even in paradoxical times times of our lives when our close relationships might be tinged with just a little bit of alienation or resentment or unforgiveness, spiritual hospitality is still required. It's not an option. Sometimes we fall short of creating and nurturing the genuine relationship that God calls us into. We have to remember that the incredible feeling of God's embrace is so wonderful. We have to remember this in order to live with compassion and spiritual hospitality. You have experienced that embrace, or you wouldn't be here. In the 4 verses that end today's gospel, Jesus helps us steer away from distorting others and ourselves with false dependencies, with unreasonable expectations and unjustified hopes. You received without payment, give without payment. We're called to see each other as God sees us. Imagine if everybody tried to see each other as God sees us. What a different world we would be. But this is only possible if we open our hearts to the amazing, grace-filled hospitality of God's love. That love is the center of our lives, and it forms the basis of our relationships. God's hospitality teaches us that close, loving, enduring relationships are to be valued and cherished, and even the distant, occasional, and abrasive relationships, as difficult as they might be, must be handled with care. As I've said before, the human heart is very fragile, and it must be handled ever so gently. Up until the events in this gospel reading today, the disciples have been in the passenger seat, and Jesus has been the driver. They've been amazed. They've been astonished by what they've seen. Jesus has made all the decisions, negotiated all the challenges, mapped out all the towns and villages, taken on all the critics, and still comes out on top. But today he tells them it's time for them to go out on their own, to do this ministry business on their own. Now, it doesn't take much life experience to imagine how they feel. Who? Me? You want me to go out there and do that stuff by myself? Who? Me? Go out and deal with this garden nonsense? Oh my God. For the first time, the 12 disciples are referred to as the apostles, meaning people who are sent out. Jesus sends them out because he believes that through his work, God is renewing and restoring Israel, an idea based on the 12 tribes. But 12 is not just a sign anymore. These 12 apostles are now part of the plan that Jesus will use to accomplish his ministry, his mission. The disciples are part of his action plan, and that means so are we. We can't sit as passengers any longer on this mission. Our place is in the driver's seat. And if we're going to call ourselves disciples, then we need to act like disciples. And that brings us back to this idea of spiritual hospitality. When I started driving way back in the dark ages, I had minimal skills, just enough to pass the driver's test, but certainly nothing compared to a seasoned driver. But with time and life experience on the road, I learned a lot of things, many things that I would never have learned from a book. Some things I learned from others, some things I learned from driving, like you never follow a snowplow. But I never would have grown in my comfort and confidence and driving skills if I hadn't taken those first solo journeys. How often I feel that same way now. So totally inadequate for the task at hand, so unprepared. But now I know. I know that it's worth the effort to make a change, to take a risk, and to make those first steps. We're sent out by this gospel today. We're going to make mistakes. There's no doubt about it. But the more that we practice spiritual hospitality, the more it will become a part of our very being. May we each have the grace to empty our teacups and offer spiritual hospitality to all those we encounter. And as we hear in Psalm 100, be joyful in the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness and come before his presence with a song. For the Lord is good. His mercy is everlasting, and his faithfulness endures from generation to generation. Thanks be to God.